we get down in this report. I'm gonna start at the end of the report, and then work my way back to the top, and you'll see why. But I'm gonna start with industry. And so what I mean by industry, we did a look at where are the industries. So when you look at economic development and jobs data, you normally have two types of data: QCEW, when you say how many jobs did we create. So this is the commonality. You say we're gonna get the FBI. We're gonna bring in this amount of jobs, so we're gonna attract this employer. That's QCEW, quarterly census of employment and wages. That's really great when you're talking about GDP and things of that sort. And that's normally your commerce and EDC when they talk about that data. Employ Prince George's focuses on another jobs number, and that's LAUS, local area unemployment and statistics. And this data is key for us because it talks about resident employment. And so where do Prince George's County residents work? Where should we upskilling our education system? What areas, like physically, do we have adequate transportation going to these areas? So these are the areas that we're looking at. And keep in mind that economic development industries might differ from your education. But what I'm always cognizant of, are we bringing jobs and building industry that our residents can get employed with? And we talk about this a lot in the cluster is there a pathway for our residents and our young people to still live and work in Prince George's 10 years from now? And so that's where we look at data related to resident employment, not total jobs. So here is where we're talking about looking at what services are our greatest sectors. This also, when you talk about the Great Recession, you talk about COVID, this is also predicated when you start seeing businesses close, we can kind of forecast what will be the impact to our community. But those that remember, early on in the pandemic, Employ Prince George's launched the Hourly Employee Relief Fund. When we looked at what businesses, when COVID was coming from the West Coast, we used California, we used Colorado, we used that data to say, when it got to the Midwest, what businesses are gonna close? And then we looked at the industries that they closed and said, where do we have in those industries? We predicted that we would be very hard hit early on in the pandemic based on health data in our industries. And so we rapidly started figuring out emergency assistance. And we engaged about 8,000 residents who were needed immediate funding because if they lost their next paycheck, they would immediately experience housing and food insecurities. And that is where you look at here. Where is the concentration of sectors that have suffered job loss? And so retail and accommodation, we know what are the big areas in our county? National Harbor, right? What are areas we look at? Food services, restaurants, and then also healthcare. We actually did lose healthcare jobs during the pandemic. And so when you look at the reliance on a specific sector, this also tells us where do we need to grow as an industry, but also dictates what's going to be hard hit for our residents. The key thing while we talk about this is when we talk about income, income is based on your income tax revenue based on where you live. So the less jobs we have, the less people that drop out of our workforce, those are depositors into county government bank accounts. And so that's where we play a role in that. When we look at occupational trends, what trends are growing in the county, and you're looking at your management, you're looking at your financial trends, office and administrative support. When you look at what trends are actually declining, education institutions and library, personal care, production, also transportation and material moving. It doesn't sound like it aligns, and that's what we want to highlight. Where is industry going? And then this is where we didn't meet with economic development. We meet with chambers of commerce to understanding what's causing the declines in this industry. When we look at real wage deterioration for cost for account of living, when people talk about how much people make, but really how much does it cost? So Prince George's County, really, when you look at where we are in the median income, and then what does it look like? So we look at where do we go from here? Wages are increasing in our area, which will show, but also the cost of living is increasing, which narrows how much money people actually have. And then remote work trends. Remote work is declining after increasing. Once we start around the start of 2023, it did start declining. Also, the pace, the distance of where people want to work is also declining. We were on a pace where pre-COVID, people were really starting to work further and further away. This really, when we talk about infrastructure, when we talk about grocery stores and restaurants, this plays a huge role. After COVID, we're seeing people want to come home. So now this is where we focus on LAUS data. Do we have the jobs to attract our residents back home? Right now and historically, we've been negative net commuting with DC and Virginia, which means most of our residents go there to work. We're positive with like a Anne Arundel or a Charles County. And so these are kind of the trends that we look at when we're doing planning. And then you have to go down, we drill down into where people move the most, where do most pockets. And this is when we talk about economic development, like what pockets Monday through Friday from 9 to 3 are the large percentage of people that aren't there. What does that look like? And then we also look at automation. Are we preparing our existing workers for the workforce in the future? And then are we teaching young people about automation? We are 61 occupations in the county are highly concentrated are relative to the national average with automation risk, which means which equates to when you're looking at our level, we have close to 22% of Prince George's County, that's at risk of automation, which is above the region of 17%. But when you compare us to other areas, we look at there. So automation is something we're going to have to look at as well. Artificial intelligence, AI skills are much in higher demand. We project those are continuing to grow. Now, your industry clusters. What clusters are we targeting? We look for large local employment, large regional employment, projected local growth, projected regional growth, GRP, local concentration, and regional concentration. I also provided a key. When you hear economists and you hear your labor people talk about NACE, SOC, and ONET, NAICS is a NACE code. That's your industry code. That's what industries they're relying on it to. Then you have a SOC code. This is an occupational classification. You know, entry level, mid level, it varies. That's a SOC code. And then ONET, that is your occupational code. This is very key because in Maryland's post-secondary kind of non-degree credentialing system through the Maryland Department of Labor, it does not align with industry. So most of the trainings that are approved for scholarships in Maryland do not relate to Prince George's County occupation. And so in my work, that means that the schools that the state says that I can give scholarships to, most of the schools don't lead to a job in Prince George's County. And since it's key, this is something where we've said it to the council, where we should really start looking at our delegation and say, Maryland Labor's got to get it together. Maybe the ranking system that they're using works for Baltimore County, works for Howard. But the ranking system that they're using to approve post-secondary training for the workforce system does not align with Prince George's County. So when we look at our in-demand clusters, the top 7 clusters are construction, real estate, rental, and leasing. And these aren't in any specific order. Transportation, warehousing, repair, and waste management. It's also information and computers. This includes all of your IT, marketing, digital marketing. Then your professional, scientific, and technical services, including administrative support professionals and nonprofits, followed by healthcare and social assistance, retail accommodation and food services, including arts, entertainment, recreation, and personal services. People say, what is personal services? Nails, salons, hair, eyelashes, all of that's personal services, massages, waxes. I won't go on. Government, excluding education. So those are our top clusters that we are seeing for Prince George's County from a resident employment. They gave a little bit of your selection methodology, and then labor force participation rate. Now that we know our clusters, and I'm going brief quickly because I don't want to spend too much of your time. All right, so who's working in these areas? We know what's in demand. We know what the industries are looking at. Your labor force is all 16 and older who are employed or actively seeking employment, divided by your non-institutionalized and civilian working age population. Nationally, the labor force participation rate has been in decline since baby boomers started to retire in the early 2000s, and then the pandemic greatly increased it. We are looking at seeing us rebounding in jobs. What Prince George's County needs to look at as we develop in the county, pre-COVID, we were trending younger. That's by population and employment. Post-COVID, population is growing in Prince George's County, but it's an older population is growing. So something changed in pre-COVID and COVID, and now we are growing older instead of younger. So when people talk about businesses talk about filling jobs, we are not producing a younger talent base. So our population and worker base is growing, is the worker base that's soon to retire. We have higher growing, soon to retire population. So this either means that they are actually not going to sooner retire, which means Prince George's County workers are going to work later, or we are getting ready to see an increased gap because our population overall and our workforce is being dominated by a soon to retire population. Employment has not reached pre-pandemic levels in 23. We believe it is going to reach in 2024. Keep in mind, Maryland is lagging behind the country in jobs. There are still 100,000 less resident employers. So this is what we talk about, QCEW. The jobs number has rebounded. The number of Maryland residents and Prince George's County residents who are working has not rebounded. So that means that we brought jobs back, but they weren't Maryland residents, and they weren't in Prince George's County. They weren't Prince George's County residents, which means we are getting the GDP, but some of that income tax revenue. And I was talking about this for the last couple of years because I said, well, if our resident employment does not increase, but the cost of government keeps increasing, we are getting ready to go into some deficits. Now, a couple of years later, that is the common conversation. So the question becomes, are we creating policies? And our recommendation for the state and across the board is looking at policies that not only attract jobs, but that increase the resident percentage of those jobs. We don't want jobs that DC residents are because it's going to hurt us. Can we create jobs that Prince George's County residents, and we create opportunities for Prince George's County residents to take those jobs? The Black population in Prince George's County for 72% of all unemployed persons, despite being 61% of the population. This also goes when we talk about our immigrant communities, our Spanish-speaking communities. They have higher levels of employment, but they are making lower wages. Now, commuting patterns is key. 76% of working residents in Prince George's County leave every single day to go to work. So that's 76% of the population leaves every day. Over 65% of jobs in Prince George's County are people who live outside of the county. So these are things to look at when we're talking about infrastructure, is that we have a high outward commuting. When we look at negative net commuters, again, most inbound commuters to Prince George's County are coming from Anne Arundel and Montgomery, whereas most of our residents are going to work in DC. And so this tells you, now, what's good between 2015 and 2021 is, as you can see, we've greater than 7% of our workers used to work greater than 50 miles away. Now that's down to 4.2%. Less than 10 miles away, that used to be 39%. It's slightly going up to 40%. Some of the biggest increases is 10 to 24 miles, which used to be 37%. Now it's up to 43%. 25 to 50 is actually down by 11%. But overall, it looks like our workers are now starting to work closer to home, which means they are telling from the census data, they want to work close to home. And that's where we go back to, how do we get our workers back home? But also, what is the infrastructure stress that we are putting on our system with so many of our workers leaving every single day? And so these are things we want to look at. Couple of things to look at: migration. Now, residents are leaving, which means not working, but moving. The county saw a net loss of 1,543 people due to migration. That's between 2012, when you're looking at your 2012 numbers. By 2021, we saw an increase of 12,000 people that left. Now, when you're talking about 1 million people, that's a small number, but we are showing a negative trend at a small amount. We also need to know where people are coming to us from. People are coming to us from D.C. and New York metropolitan area. When you look in your report, you're talking about the Bronx, you're talking about Queens. So I don't know who's coming from New York, but it seems the Bronx and the Queens, people that live in the Bronx and Queens, there's something that fits directly with Prince George's County because they are moving here in droves from the Bronx and Queens. So I don't know what to tell you. My family actually moved here. So my mom lived in Queens. So I don't know. Maybe I should ask her. But she bounced around her whole life. So, but looks like the Bronx and Queens are looking at it from a migration. Discussion for a later date. We call this a back of a napkin unscientific framework. When I was sitting at Jaspers with some of the economists, I said, let's really start talking about what is causing people not to drop out of our labor force. And this is what they put together, and they went back and researched it. He said, don't have all the data, but they said your lower labor force participation rate can attribute to social media. And social media, and you see increases in social media, you see increases in mental health. You also can correlate mental health with drug abuse. When that creates an instability in economics, you have increased people living at home. Increased people living at home generates a lower marriage ability and poor relationship rate, which leads to overall lower marriages, lower birth rates, which trends to the aging population and your lower labor force participation rate. Now, he said, I'm not a health professor, but when I look at your data, when they were out of Moscow, Idaho, he said, this is what we're coming up with. And they provided us some general data related to addiction. And a lot of people are talking about fentanyl and your hardcore drugs is true. But I also want to highlight, let's talk about alcohol. 232 million missed work days in 2022 from alcohol. 232 nationally. 232 million missed work days due to alcohol. So just something to think about, that there's a lot of addiction out here. And then also higher incarceration rates, and then especially higher incarceration rates amongst African Americans. And so this also can lead to a population and some issues here. Now, real quick, Councilwoman Denoga, and I'll send this back up to you or whoever that be that's controlling the technology. One of the last things that I will leave you with, and I can answer any questions, is education. This is going to be something that we need to really look at. Our schools, where's the location? What are our schools focusing on? We really need to make sure that we have a higher concentration. Oh, here, I'll give you this match here. This is when I say the state. We need to really talk with our state leaders on how they approve education. LICAS map, for every program relevant, there are 354 available programs that lead to an occupation. Only 166 of the 354 lead to program completions to actually a job. So that means more than half don't lead to job completion here. Now, this is a data statistic that is outside our control. That's a regulatory issue with Maryland Department of Labor. But for Prince George's County, what they're approving and the rubrics that they're using doesn't match our job. So that is something that we really need to look at, of how the state is preparing and identifying where we can send our adults for. And this is like your post-secondary Perkins Act at the community college, your private career schools. Whatever the state is using, it's not aligned with jobs in Prince George's County. And we're the second largest workforce system, so you would think, being the second largest workforce system, they would want to align their data with us. Graduation rates are falling. Tale of two counties here. One other thing to look at is the population in Prince George's County is 23% Hispanic, but our school population is close to 40%. Unfortunately, and what they're attributing to is to a lot of Hispanic workers being low wage, having to work multiple jobs, is impacting the success of the house schools and the young people. So the Hispanic population you see in purple has the lowest college degree attainment in Prince George's County. In Prince George's County, also, while we have an above average amount of people with a graduate degree, we have an above the national average of people without a high school diploma. Primarily are immigrant and foreign born. So we really are a tale of two counties. And then from our K through 12 piece, lastly, something to look at too is chronic absenteeism. Graduation rates are falling. But if we're not in school, graduation rates are going to struggle. So you can see that since 2019, being around above 20% graduation rate, chronic absenteeism, 6 weeks or more, 35% of our high school students miss at least 6 weeks of school. It's going to be hard for people to be successful if they're missing 6 weeks of school. If you look at that bottom chart, it's smaller. When you look at where our highest chronic absenteeism is, that purple line, you see all those lines kind of towards the middle? That purple line is the Hispanic community. They are far off the charts relates to chronic absenteeism. And they also represent some of our lowest wage households and our lowest wage communities. So when we're talking about infrastructure and when I'm talking about the EDC, I'm always talking about where the jobs are, where the people are, what do we need to move people, what education do we need to create that lead to livable wage jobs? Because if we can stabilize that adult household, if we can increase that income, we can create more tax revenue, but also create more educational outcomes for the young people. And ultimately, we can build stronger business community and ultimately just still drive more tax revenue. So I'm gonna turn it over back because I went 6 minutes over, but these are our demographics. And when we're talking about development, we're talking about grocery stores, we're talking about schools, and we're talking about just the taxation on migration, like 210. If you look in that area and we drill down the data, you have so much higher concentration of people leaving and trafficking 210, right? That equates to some of what you see as the accidents, also some of the flow. So the question becomes, are we attracting a business strategy, economic development strategy that attracts with our education and our residency and also our young people? So I'm going to give up my clicker to Councilman DeNoga.
Thank you, Mr. Simmons. Educational and excellent as always. Questions?
I just have one quick question about the labor market and the numbers about like employment and unemployed. How is that defined? Because I know sometimes there's some discordance with, like, if you have a job that you only work 20 hours a week, maybe you're considered employed, but it's not enough to actually make a living wage. So how is that factored into here? Is it someone who has 2 jobs equal 40 hours a week, or kind of like that?
Yeah, we didn't include that. We didn't include that in your briefing, but it is in the actual purple book where we do, on page 42, we do underemployed. So that will be called individuals whose educational attainment exceeds the requirements of their current employment and who earn below a livable wage. And so we talk about that would be considered underemployment. And so that section starts on page 39 with employment and unemployment, and then underemployment is on 42. We also have an above average, we talk about underemployment and youth employment. Now, young adult employment in Prince George's County is horrendous. In some pockets in our economic inequities report, we have 22% young adult unemployment. 16 to 24, 22% of the population. This also kind of hangs out, unfortunately, Councilman DeNoga, up in our northern part of the county and our southern part. Kind of on those outwardly wings, our young adult unemployment is higher. Some of that is attributed to access to reliable transportation that's connecting them to the jobs. But another key point is our adult underemployment is also contributing to our young adult and youth unemployment. We have an above average of 35 to 44-year-olds in minimum wage jobs. So when you're talking about your 16-year-old, your 17-year-old, 18-year-old, they are competing against 35 to 44 for that job. It might be that adult second job, but two of the things the report identified is on underemployment. We have a much above average 35 to 44-year-old in minimum wage jobs, and our young people can't compete for a job. And one of our employer partners is Chick-fil-A right up here. Chick-fil-A up on this corner. They actually he can tell you, the owners can tell you, management, where they break their shifts out by age. So they have an older shift a middle-aged shift, and then a younger shift. And they actually can tell you the difference in customer service by shift. The older shift has a higher customer service rate, higher efficiency rate. But one of the things that Chick-fil-A is doing is really creating shifts that are going to attract different workforces. And so these are the things our employers are having to do to get creative to coalesce around these economic factors.
Thank you. That was very informative.
Walter, the slide that talks about the out migration for people commuting and the in migration. So do we have an understanding of the 76% of our residents who are going elsewhere for jobs, what industries they're in, and also the 65% that are coming to the county to work where they're working?
Yep, so that starts on page 50. Again, didn't want to go too deep in. That starts on page 50. We actually break it down on 52. We break it down by neighborhoods. If you're interested on the top neighborhoods based on jobs, resident workers, and net commuters. We also go down and show you on starting on page 53 and 54 where they're working. And by the time you get to later on, you start talking about educational attainment and where people are. So starting on page 50 is where you start getting into commuting patterns in the actual purple book in the report. And for the public that's listening, the State of Workforce Report is on our website, on all of our websites with updated information, and you can find these page numbers in the PDF report online.
Thank you.
And we provided, Councilman Denoga knows, we did a briefing for the council, and they received their reports as well.
Okay, I have a couple quick questions. My first set of questions is on the cluster overviews. I didn't see education on there, so is it buried in one of the categories?
Professional services.
Okay, so I thought it might
So
be.
we're grouping them in professional services because we use clusters and not industries.
Okay.
Yep.
And the next question is, what's driving the reduction in healthcare and social assistance?
So we had a huge number of workers drop out of the workforce. Healthcare social assistance had one of the largest people leave, which we expected. One part just because of how taxing COVID was on the industry. Two, the nature of some of the jobs going automation and virtual. The job, if you go into the hospital building now, a lot of those front desk offices are empty and they got a virtual check-in or you do something on your phone. And so we lost a lot of those. The occupation might have been an administrative occupation, but the job was a healthcare job. So, and you combine that with there's the struggle in recruitment. We have what you call a talent pipeline leak, where we produce a lot of healthcare graduates across certificate and college. We don't keep them. And so one of the things that we're looking at, we've been really talking with Deputy County Administrator Angie Rogers on what are some tools and techniques for talent attraction. And so one of the things we're looking at next year is a HBCU economic development attraction across the country. People in Prince George County is known for a heavily minority majority. Normally, counties and jurisdictions send businesses to schools. What we've started saying is, let's take our county leadership to schools and say, no, Kaiser Permanente doesn't want you in Prince George's County. Prince George's County government wants you in Prince George's County. And targeting students that are most likely to want to move to our area, we will target schools. And so when I tell you we matched the NAICS code and SOC code, the meeting I had before this, we actually are matching every HBCU and every college and university in the region. So every HBCU in America and every college and university in DC, Maryland, Virginia, and we're mapping them by the NAICS code to industry, the SOC code to occupation classification, and the ONET code, which is the job title. And every area where we have a gap that we can't fill, we're going to match it with the college that's most likely to produce somebody in that occupation. And we're going to put that as a heavy concentration. So if it's Frostburg or Salisbury or Hampton or Howard, we will know which colleges are producing talent that we specifically need. We will create a talent attraction or recruitment strategy with that college university for that specific occupation. We also are doing the same thing with the 79 middle and high schools because some of the high schools have different tracks. We're now matching those tracks and CTE to the specific industry. And so that when we do career days, we're going to uniquely bring in businesses to match the tracks at those schools to give a more direct. So we'll do more general, but we'll also do more focused. And we're giving access to the system to PGCPS to help them make sure they're engaging. So the combination of people leaving the workforce, the automation, and then us having people not getting educated and not coming back to the county councilman.
Okay, one more question. Migration, residents are leaving. How is this calculated? It talks about in 2012 a loss of 1,543. It's escalated to 12,000. Two thoughts. One, I think from the 2010 census to the 2020 census, we did have growth, but in addition to having growth, we know that we didn't count a lot of people. So I'm curious, how accurate is this based on job losses or?
Yeah, we are looking at census, and there is an issue with people lacking being counted. That's a 100% spot on in our pieces. So we're looking at the combination between census and jobs data, and so that starts on page 54.
Because it seems like we are gaining people, not losing people. It's just we might be gaining people that we can't count.
Exactly. No, and that is, and
So, by the way, so that troubles me when we have a statement that we are losing this many people down to the exact number, when it's available data shows we're losing people, but caveat, we also know that there are people uncounted.
and that's true, and that's a key. They are uncounted. The issue from an economic development is how and where can we count them? You can count them if they're not working on the books, you can't count them there either.
Right.
But this is why I brought up the education. The educational indicator is the tool that is our best case use. Because if you look at it, we're not counting our immigrant community accurately in the census. You know that what you said, Councilman Denoga, is 100% correct. Because 23% of the population, but 40% of the schools and growing. There's also some birth rate data here that's going to show. So from access to healthcare, we can also see that well. So we aren't counting them accurately or as well for various reasons, but we are seeing that there is a disparity because there's much higher numbers in education and your healthcare numbers. So that does exactly show that. Yeah. But it also means that we don't necessarily have the supports for that population as well, because the adult supports is what triggers like our state and federal investment. And because we don't necessarily have some of that, and that's why I mentioned like the WIOA regulations that are going through the federal government, that means that our federal influx of those dollars are going to never match the need because we can't count it accurately.
Yeah, there's another element, which is that the schools, this has gone on for years, the schools with higher immigration populations have higher annual turnover, and it can be dramatic annual turnover. So the adults associated with the students are moving from, whether it's in the county from place to place or out of the county. So it's kind of hard to count anybody because the transitory nature of some of the population is just so high. So I'm not sure. We want to know what the migration pattern is, but calculating it just seems almost impossible.
Yeah, from a level of accuracy, 100%. What we are working to release, hopefully it's supposed to be released this month. Obviously, this is come and gone. We have another report called the Economic Inequities Report. And council member, that is going to be more driven out to the councilmanic district and the local level data. And that will show some different migratory patterns of where, when we were counting where's where and what's that, but there's always going to be a level of inaccuracy in any kind of voluntary data population. One of the things that we are working on is the Maryland Latinos Unidos is a organization heavily supported by some of our delegation, Delegate Jocelyn Melnick, Denny Tavares. They have their own counts. And when they count, because it's coming from a community, they actually have more accurate counts now, not as big as the census. But we are partnering with MLU to see if we can link our databases because we want to, from an EPG standpoint, we want to serve the people. So we're hoping that our partnership with Maryland Latinos Unidos, MLU, will help us from a service delivery. It's not going to help us in the data, but from a service delivery to better connect with those people, and also trying to figure out some ways to help pockets to help residents become legally eligible to work as well.
Thank you.
We would hope that the report comes out by February, March, but I'd also hope to have it come out in December. So we're working on it, but we want to put a good report, and so we had Lightcast and some other groups to help with data. Now we have our contract economist, the METS group, which is combing through it because by November we realized that it was a good report that nobody could understand. We'd have to get the Park and Planning Board to translate it for us. So what we took back to the economists was nobody understands this but you all. So let's make it something that we want to report that the average resident can understand. So hopefully February, March.
Very good.
And then we will drive our resources, those federal resources, based on that report. And so that's why the councilman knows we opened a job and resource lab in the Laurel Multi-Service Center, and we're going in Laurel, and it has we're targeting specific. So we did a Hispanic government information session, and that's because a lot of people, you think Langley Park or Delphi, but the migration patterns that I know the councilman was aware of, there is some heavier migration up in the North part of the county, but the services didn't match. So we are trying to match services with the migration, which is why we had one of those events. We did one in there, but we also did one in North part of the county.
And we thank you. Okay, thank you.